I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to RealAg on the Weekend. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. It is great to be with you here today. Hope you're having yourself a great weekend. We're heading into kind of a really strange week. We got July 1st on Tuesday, and then July 4th at the end of the week. So it's for North American work, it's a little bit of a mismatch for sure. But hard to believe we are at the end of June, and July is right in front of us as we're finally maybe going to get to a bit of some warmer weather for the bulk of Western Canada here in the coming week or so. I think we'll kind of take it as when we get to July, we are expecting some high 20s, low 30s kind of temperatures for sure. It's been a very busy week in the world of agriculture, and I really do appreciate you tuning in here today for sure. Today on the show, we're going to hear from Lauren Comin. She is with Seeds Canada. Now, an interesting little piece here as it results based on some of the tariff platforms that are being discussed between Canada and the U.S. We're going to get to Canada-U.S. trade in a second here. But there's some concern from the seed industry about what can potentially, how it impacts canola seed, hybrid canola seed coming in to Canada. So we'll talk about that. We're also going to talk about bovine TB, and Lyndsey Smith has a very fascinating conversation with Dr. Noel Ritson-Bennett from CFIA. So for all you livestock producers out there, you want to pay attention to that. And then we're going to learn about a new product that was released this week in the northern Great Plains. I was there for the release in Great Falls, Montana. I got a conversation with Hugo Borsari, who is Vice President of Seeds and Traits for North America with BASF. And why are we listening to that? Because there's a Canadian flair to this, where a lot of the research work and the breeding has actually happened in Saskatchewan, but farmers in Western Canada are not going to have access to this new hybrid Brassica gensea called InVigor Gold. They're not going to have access to it anytime soon. And farmers in the northern tier, in the northern Great Plains, they are going to have access by 2027. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Now, if you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Okay, on Friday afternoon, we had big news that broke. We got some troubles when it comes to the Canada-U.S. trade relationship. President Trump posted on Truth Social, "We have been informed that Canada, a very difficult country to trade with, including the fact that they have charged our farmers as much as 400% tariffs for years on dairy products, has just announced that they are putting a digital services tax on our American technology companies, which is a direct, blatant attack on our country. They are obviously copying the European Union, which has done the same thing and is currently under discussion with us. Also, based on this egregious tax, we are hereby terminating all discussions on trade with Canada, effective immediately. We will let Canada know the tariffs that they will be paying to do business with the United States of America within the next 7-day period. Thank you for your attention to this matter." So that's President Trump on Truth Social. Of course, they've had a lot of meetings. So first of all, okay, I want to break this down for you a little bit. First of all, the 400% tariff on dairy products is above the tariff rate allocation. The U.S. isn't even filling right now that tariff rate quota. Okay, so nobody is paying 400% on anything when it comes to dairy products at this time. So that's one thing. Okay, one piece. Also, Canada just did not announce the digital services tax. Now, we can argue whether we should have this digital services tax that came to be during the time that Justin Trudeau was prime minister. It's going to be implemented next week. This is not something just that came about. This has been a controversial issue between the Americans and Canada for quite some time. Not new at all. And so he's mentioned about the European Union. That has to do with that VAT tax as well. That's kind of what is being alluded to there. Now we're going to see this is I kind of think this is just on brand, to be honest with you. I sort of think that what we're going to see here over the course of the weekend, if you turn on the news, is a lot of, can you believe what Trump said? Can you believe what he is saying about us? Can you believe that they're going to just apply a blanket tariff to us? The reality is we're probably going to have a blanket tariff anyways. If you look at the UK deal, they worked out some sort of a framework. I wouldn't call it like a comprehensive trade deal, but they have some sort of a framework. It also comes with a flat 10% tariff on all goods coming into the U.S. from Europe, or sorry, from the UK. We're going to end up here anyway. So let's look into our crystal ball. Next week, if there's no movement from Canada, President Trump says 25%. Canada says, here's what we'll do. They come to some sort of deal, and it's a flat 10% tariff on goods coming out of Canada into the U.S. And then we can get into the who really pays for that. This just kind of seems a little bit predictable. Honestly, I think you go back to January, February, there's a bigger reaction. I may be saying something a little bit different. This is just this is on brand. Part of I feel like we've read this chapter before to a certain extent. I don't know. I don't want to say it doesn't have an impact because it does. Canada needs trade with the U.S. And by the way, U.S. needs trade with Canada. There's no two bones about it. There's no other way to look at this. And a flat 10% tariff on the UK is different than a flat percent tariff on Canada or Mexico. President Trump views this as some sort of subscription fee, you gotta pay for entry. Well, the reality is we know this. It's not going to be the Canadian exporters that are paying a lot of those tariffs. It's the American consumer that's paying a lot of those tariffs. Now, maybe not all of it. Maybe it's shared, but it does have an impact. It does have an impact. So we'll see now, for the Prime Minister, from a Canadian perspective, this is new territory for Prime Minister Carney. He has had a pretty smooth relationship so far with President Trump. He's going to have to fix it if Canada wants to have some sort of, listen, I think Carney's been very strategic in planning ahead with this idea of, 5% of the Canadian GDP being committed to defense spending. I think they've been trying to get ahead of this with some of the big promises when it comes to defense. But at this point, I would still pretty much assume that we're going to have a trade deal at the other side of this. We are. It's unavoidable. We love your thoughts on it, though. Like I said, to provide feedback here on this topic, what's your reaction to President Trump and the United States saying, hey, trade talks over. We're walking away from the table because of these very stubborn Canadians. So hard to deal with. Yeah, that's what Canada is known for. So hard to deal with. S. Haney is shaney at realagriculture.com is my email address. And of course, you can call the Real Ag feedback line, 855-776-6147. Let's take a break. We've got more coming up here on Real Ag on the Weekend. We're back right after this.
FCC Ag Expert. Deep in the fields and deep in the data to back up your decisions on the farm. Get started at agexpert.ca.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Mazik Seeds and Lalamon Plant Care.
If you're serious about agriculture, Real Ag's got you covered.
For over 10 years, we've listened to and shared what producers have to say about everything from policy to agronomy from coast to coast.
Keep up with the latest in Canadian agriculture at realagriculture.com through daily newsletters and check out our YouTube channel.
Thanks for joining us in the Real Ag community as we continue to cover and serve North American agriculture.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
For Real Agriculture, I'm Kelvin Heppner. The effects of U.S. tariffs in general have maybe not been as significant as feared or possible when they were rolled out back in February-March timeframe. But there are certain products coming into Canada that are still subject to tariffs, especially the Canadian counter tariffs. And joining us to discuss here on RealAg, I'm pleased to welcome Lauren Comin, Director of Policy at Seeds Canada. Thanks for joining us once again today, Lauren.
Hi, Kelvin. Thanks for having me.
So how are tariffs affecting the seed side of things right now, and in particular, I guess, the Canadian government's counter tariffs that were implemented in retaliation for the Trump administration's tariffs back in early March?
So it's been a pretty rocky road for the seed sector. I know it's been a rocky road for everyone, but, the seed sector, we've had a number of products that, came in and out of concern. When the first counter tariff list, so that's the $30 billion list, was released from the government on March 4th, you would have seen low uric acid rape or colza seed. If you look at that HS code, 1205.10.00, that's actually the HS code for canola seed. And when we say canola seed, usually, we're talking about commodity. But because canola seed for sowing is covered at the at the 8-digit HS code level by that HS code on the list, canola seed for sowing is included as well. In the second list that was put out for consultation, there were a lot of different agricultural seeds of concern. So obviously we submitted our comments during the consultation period. Our position generally is seed should not be tariffed. We have a very complementary relationship with the U.S. when it comes to seed trade. Luckily, that secondary list was not implemented. Not saying that it couldn't be in the future, but right now we still have significant concerns with canola seed being on that first list, and those concerns are really going to come to a head here in a couple of months, when canola seed is harvested from the Pacific Northwest in the U.S. To be moved up into Canada to be used for domestic canola production.
To what extent is our canola seed market here in Canada supplied by production from the U.S.? If you can put some numbers to it, or just even ballpark kind of rough estimates.
Sure. So I think, anyone who doesn't know about the intricacies of canola seed production may say, why is that a problem? We produce so much canola here in Canada, right? We are the land of canola in Western Canada. And yes, that's true. But the seed production system of canola is sensitive, and it has different needs than commodity canola production. So we produce about 70% of the seed that we use domestically in Canada. We produce about 25% in the U.S., and another 5% comes from South America, mainly Chile. And the reason why we have seed that's coming from the U.S., 25% is a pretty significant level. I think most people would be surprised to hear that we do source that much. Is that, there's only so much land in Southern Alberta, and Southern Alberta is a great environment for producing canola. But much of our canola production is traded, not traded. So, some of those traits are regulated traits, and there is a requirement for seed production for seed plots to be isolated from any other canola production plot. So that isolation distance really does limit the number of acres that can be put into seed production. Another factor is seed production is vulnerable to environment. So you need to make sure that you have quality seed and it germinates at the end of the day. And if it's, too hot, too rainy, etc., you may lose some of your production and not be able to sell it as seed. So many companies will spread out the risk across the Pacific Northwest as well, to make sure that they are able to have adequate seed of the right quality when it comes time for farmers to plant their crop.
Okay. So the Canadian government, Lauren, has granted exemptions elsewhere, and there is kind of this narrative out there, at least there have been some reports about how the Carney Liberal government has quietly backed off on a lot of the counter tariffs, and that they aren't affecting as many things as originally said. What's the possibility of a reprieve, or what are the next steps in terms of that process, and what's the likelihood, I guess, of canola seed and other seeds that are potentially affected by these 25% tariffs having a reprieve from them?
So obviously, we've had a lot of uncertainty. It's a very volatile time. The discussions that are being had at a very high level. So, we've been told that the tariff lists, if any changes are made to the existing tariff lists, it'll be done because of discussions between the U.S. and Canadian trade delegations. So, we're not going to see that canola seed HS code quietly erased from the list. If that still saying if that's a possibility, sure, we'll take it. But I don't think that's going to happen. There is a remission framework that's a possibility, and we are encouraging members who are impacted to submit into the remission framework. But, that being said, anything could happen in the next 30 days. Prime Minister Carney has already signaled that he wants to get back to the table and discuss tariffs within the next 30 days. So obviously we're hopeful that we'll resolve these concerns. As I mentioned, trade of seed between the U.S. and Canada is very complementary. Canada imports and exports about $500 million of seed each year between Canada and the U.S. So, we don't have those trade deficits that have been mentioned previously. And because of the free trade relationship that both countries have enjoyed in the past for seed, they've built that into their production systems. So it is really important for supply in Canada for Canadian farmers to have access to the seed they need, that we're able to access the U.S. market without adding any additional cost to seed.
That's Kelvin Heppner of Real Agriculture talking to Lauren Comin of Seeds Canada. I encourage you to go to RealAgriculture.com and listen to that full interview. Some really concerning things going forward as it applies to the potential pricing of hybrid canola seed that has to come out of the U.S. And like Lauren talked about, there's it's not as easy as, well, we'll just produce it here in Canada. Well, we can't. We got 21.5 million acres of canola in Western Canada, and there's only so much isolation space in Southern Alberta. There's only so many areas in Canada that have the climatic conditions to be able to produce that canola seed to achieve the hybridity levels and the kind of seed of quality that Canadian farmers expect to be planting. And so you just can't make that happen in other areas just because you want to. And so that's why there's production in the U.S. That's why there's production in Chile, and so on and so forth. And so this is a real bind for the Canadian industry. So check that out at realagriculture.com. You know what gets farmers' attention? Hey, price of seed. No, that is for sure. Okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to learn a little bit more about bovine TB. Lyndsey Smith of Real Agriculture did a fantastic interview, and we're going to learn all about that disease and more when we come back. You're listening to Real Ag on the Weekend.
Mark your calendar for Ag Smart Olds, July 29th to 31st, a must-attend educational expo to explore data and technology-driven solutions in agriculture. Visit agsmartolds.ca for more information and to register.
Real Ag Radio is Canada's only daily radio show focused on agriculture. Get expert advice on Agronomic Monday. Tuesdays and Wednesdays will cover a broad range of issues. Thursday we'll hear from farmers across the country on the Farmer Rapid Fire. And we'll wrap things up Fridays with the Real Ag Issues panel with Kelvin Heppner and Lyndsey Smith. Join us Monday through Friday at 4:30 Eastern. And don't forget about the replay at 7 in the morning on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BASF Canada. Welcome back to Real Ag on the weekend. Well, Lyndsey Smith of Real Agriculture had a chance to talk about bovine TB with Dr. Noel Ritson-Bennett of CFIA. Here's a portion of that conversation.
Serious news out of Manitoba. Hearing a dairy herd in Manitoba testing positive for bovine TB. We did report on the initial finding, but definitely want to dig into some of the common questions that we're getting, and that I have as well. First, let's start with the very basics. What is bovine tuberculosis? Because I think sometimes you hear the word TB and it conjures up all sorts of things. How is bovine TB different, the same as what we might see in humans?
Bovine TB is a bacterial disease that is transmitted predominantly within bovine animals, so cattle. There are some subtle differences between what we typically think of as human tuberculosis, so that it's a different organism, but it's very similar. Both organisms can affect humans though as well. So we talk of bovine TB as being a zoonotic disease, meaning that it's transmissible from animals to humans. And indeed, much of the control programs that we've put in place for just over 100 years in Canada now are based upon the fact that tuberculosis is a zoonotic disease, and so there's consequences if it is allowed to be transmitted or within the herd within Canada or from animals to humans.
So they are separate but similar organisms, and bovine TB can be contracted by humans. It is zoonotic.
That's right. So they're both part of what is referred to as Mycobacterium tuberculosis complex, which is again a group of organisms that behave similarly and are somewhat difficult to differentiate unless you do specific testing. So Mycobacterium tuberculosis complex comprises more than bovine tuberculosis or tuberculosis bovis and human tuberculosis. There's also numerous other organisms within that group. But so they're separate species in terms of bacteria, but they're very similar, very closely related.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the herd in Manitoba. It's a dairy herd where there was a positive animal. In my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, we've heard about this certainly in maybe the beef side. Is it very rare to find it in dairy? How common is it to find it in dairy cattle?
So in Canada, we haven't recently, you're right, we haven't seen it in a dairy herd for some time. I believe it some time ago, and you're right in that predominantly we have seen sporadic cases of TB, mostly in Western Canada and again in beef herds. And so it is a little bit unusual for us or novel, I would say, not necessarily unusual, novel for us in Canada to find the disease in a dairy herd. That being said, in other parts of the world, it's a very common place to find tuberculosis in dairy herds, including our neighbors to the south. They have certainly seen TB in dairy herds recently.
Where then does a TB infection typically come from? Are there wild animals that can carry it? Is it one of those we wish we knew? Or where? How does it end up in either a beef herd or a dairy herd, for that matter?
So that's really a big question. Okay, recently, so in recent memory, up until in Manitoba around Riding Mountain, some people will remember that there was tuberculosis around Riding Mountain, and there was tuberculosis amongst the elk and deer around Riding Mountain National Park, and so in that instance, there was transmission between wildlife and cattle. there was interaction, and there was a lot of work that went into separating the interactions. So even putting fences up around feed, for example, and when we were able to do that, we eliminated the potential for contamination of feed, and we were able to eliminate tuberculosis from the cattle. All of the tuberculosis cases that we've seen since that time and recently do not have any linkages to wildlife. In terms of the organism that we've seen in wildlife, and the similarities are not the same organisms that we're seeing today or within, in the last sort of 10, 15 years. All that to say is that yes, wildlife can be a reservoir for tuberculosis, but it's not something that we're seeing presently, and certainly not in this case. The latest data that we have is that, similar to recent cases, is that this is a new introduction to Canada, most closely related to other tuberculosis cases that have been identified in the United States or Mexico.
When something like this is found, so a positive case like this in a dairy herd, is there testing to basically like fingerprint it, like to look at the actual makeup of
Yes. It's called speleotyping. Yeah, and they're able to go back and look at the genetic makeup of the bacteria, and then again they can compare that with other bacteria that we have on record. And so we share that. We have a database that the vast majority of recent cases in Canada, and we also share that information with the U.S. and vice versa. And so that's how we can closely say that, well, this is the closest relative that we have known relative comes from, other cases that we've identified. And that's, so all that to say is that there is no linkage at all to wildlife in these cases.
In thinking about, and we'll unpack sort of what it means for beef herds, dairy herds in a moment, but from the human side, how is tuberculosis spread? Do we need to worry about a dairy cow and milk, et cetera, or does pasteurization take care of that? How might a human contract bovine TB?
So you're right. So milk is a potential source of contamination, but pasteurization, and we pasteurize all of our commercial milk in Canada. Pasteurization will kill the organism, and so milk and milk products are safe to eat. Likewise, all of our meat, it goes through inspection. And so that is how this case was identified. Again, an animal went to a federal slaughter plant. An inspector noticed lesions that were compatible with tuberculosis. Samples were taken and it was submitted to the lab, and that animal was withheld. It was condemned, so it wasn't in the food chain. So we have processes in place to mitigate that risk of transmission to humans, and mainly inspection and pasteurization. That being said, the prevalence of the disease within animals in Canada is very low. It is zoonotic, and so those are why those things are in place, and that's why pasteurization plays a huge part in our public health, to be honest, because it eliminates those diseases such as tuberculosis.
Now, and that I think brings up an interesting point about this, and a question that I had. I have livestock. There are certain things you look for that an animal is unwell or not doing well that may indicate certain issues, and some of them may be metabolic, some of them may be pathogenic. How would a producer suspect, or why would they suspect TB? How do animals present if they're infected with TB?
Tuberculosis is typically thought of as a chronic disease. I mean, it's not something that has, that you can look at an animal and say right away, I know what's going on here. Oftentimes animals that maybe appear normal at a distance, or even clinically when we see them in slaughter and through inspection, we can identify those lesions. And so it's not something that is typically diagnosed per se routinely as a matter of just normal course.
Hear the rest of the interview at RealAgriculture.com. We'll be right back on Real Ag on the Weekend right after this.
Co-op Ag's own bin logic is the ultimate tool for ensuring the success of your grain operation. Simple, scalable, solar-powered, and cost-effective, Bin Logic lets you monitor your bins from anywhere. Contact your co-op equipped team member to learn more. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is a video series that showcases the latest in canola research and production agronomy. Learn from some of the best at your own pace through quick and timely producer-focused videos available on our YouTube channel. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is the quickest way to keep up to date on all the latest in canola production. Boost your canola IQ with the Canola School, brought to you by BASF, and visit canolaschool.com.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
So much going on in the world of agriculture. I feel like in both the cases with Lauren Comin and the discussion we just had about bovine TB, where I'm cutting them short. And maybe I should just play the full interview and we hear one topic through the whole show here. But there's just so many things to get to. So, you can catch up on all of these interviews and more by going to RealAgriculture.com. This week, I was down in Great Falls, Montana. I was there for the launch of InVigor Gold. Now, this is hybrid Brassica gensea. So typically in Canada, we're growing Brassica napus, and that's very popular spring canola, Argentine canola. And so this is something different. This is a gensea, which has been around for quite some time. Now, we have not had hybrid gensea, but for quite some time, Canadian, there has been gensea programs out there. These are typically varieties that perform well in more arid brown soil zone kind of conditions. And what we're going to hear now, and then I've got some thoughts for you to consider. So what we're going to do is we're going to hear my interview with Hugo Borsari, who is the Vice President of Seeds and Traits for North America at BASF. Here's that conversation. Okay, so why is there so much excitement about InVigor Gold from your perspective?
As you know, there's an increasing demand for canola in terms of feed, food, and fuel. And there are some areas where it's very difficult to cultivate canola because it's hot and dry. And with this technology, with InVigor Gold, we believe that we're going to be able to help farmers to solve their needs and better cultivate canola in that kind of situation with a better yield stability and also to maximize profitability.
Yeah, and so we're talking about Brassica gensea, not Argentine canola. And what's exciting about this is that you mentioned in some areas it's hot and it's dry. We're in the Golden Triangle here in Montana. This is kind of the epicenter of hot and dry. So there's a plan launched for 2027 in the Northern Plains, 2029 in the Central Plains, and Canada sometime in the early 2030s. Why the differences in the launches?
Well, because of the nuances that we have in both Canada and the U.S. Just to give you an idea, there are 3 key pillars in order to enable us to launch InVigor Gold in both the U.S. and Canada. The first one is related to the deregulation of the Liberty Link trait globally. The second one is market acceptance. And the third one is to ensure that we have the registrations needed for crop protection to be used in that crop. So because of that, we need to respect the appropriate timeline for both countries.
It was interesting. The governor who we heard from earlier on in the show here, Governor Gianforte was very excited about the opportunity for Montana growers. And, as you drive down I-15 coming down from Calgary, I saw a lot of fallow. I saw a lot of wheat. Montana is obviously famous for its wheat, but also I saw a lot of fallow. This is an area that is really desperate for some other cropping options.
You're right. I think it's going to be an amazing option for farmers in this area, but also in other areas like the ones that you mentioned in the Central Great Plains and also in the brown soil in Canada. I think there's an amazing opportunity for farmers to take advantage of InVigor Gold in their crop rotation to help them maximize yield and profitability.
And so if I'm in an area that maybe, I've tried canola before, I've tried one of the InVigor hybrids, and, they work in the areas where there's, really, really strong organic matter and the appropriate rainfall. But we know we get into those fringe canola acres where the market gets a little bit softer. We move away from canola. Now, potentially, Gencia and InVigor Gold could be an option, and those no longer are fringe acres for canola.
That's right. In those kind of situations, in that kind of region, I think farmers are going to have an amazing tool to take advantage from and to reintroduce canola in their fields.
How many hybrids are coming to the market in 2027?
We're going to start with one hybrid, and then we're planning to bring many others in the upcoming years.
Yeah. So Gencia has been around for a while. Why now? What's been the enabler, the launch pad for BASF to take this measure now?
First of all, our breeding program is pretty strong and pretty good. We're very confident in the quality of the germplasm that we're bringing to the marketplace. It's going to be a traded version with Liberty Link, and the good news is that in the coming years, we're planning to introduce in our InVigor Gold portfolio both club root resistance and also pod shatter.
So you're bringing the full package to acres that aren't used to a lot of traits coming into their area.
That's correct. That kind of full package is going to enable farmers to grow canola in that kind of difficult situation and help them to ensure a stable yield and maximize profitability.
The other thing we heard a lot about during the session when we were back at the university there was just, we're going to hear later from Montana Renewables, the excitement around biofuels and, creating that demand. That's got to give a seed company like yourself a little bit of push, some initiative to say, hey, you know what, we need more canola.
Yeah, as I mentioned, there's an increasing demand for canola in terms of feed, food, and also fuel. And we're pretty confident that InVigor Gold is going to help farmers to meet that increasing demand.
So coming to Canada in early 2030s, a little bit less definite on that release. Does that depend on the regulatory system, or what's the barriers there?
It depends on the regulatory framework and also stakeholder engagement. What I would say is that we're planning hard to bring that technology by the end of this decade or in the beginning of the next one.
That was my conversation with Hugo Borsari of BASF down in Great Falls, Montana this week for that product launch of InVigor Gold. So why? We just heard about a product launch for the Northern Plains. What are we doing here, Shaun? Here's what sticks out to me. Because of the Canadian system, Canadian regulatory, just the way that we operate and do business in Canada, here's a product launch developed for the most part, in Western Canada. Now, a lot of obviously done lots of testing and things like that there in the U.S. But, on the show, on the RealAg Radio podcast on Wednesday, I talked to Stuart Brandt, who's like the global head of canola breeding for BASF. He's based out of Saskatoon. Right? So there's a Canadian tilt to this. And the product's not going to be available in Canada to maybe the early 2030 decade. Well, growers in, say, like Glasgow, Montana, are going to be having grown it since 2027. This is exactly what we talk about when we said Canada needs to reduce the red tape. We need to find ways for products to come, innovation and technology to come to market faster. So if this product's been deemed safe in the U.S., surely we could be growing it in Canada. I have questions about this. Would love your thoughts on that and more. All you have to do, whether it's Trump and trade, it's Canada's ability to compete going forward, it's innovation. Maybe you got some thoughts on what you heard there in the interview with Lauren Comin from Seeds Canada about some of the challenges related to tariffs and this integrated supply chain that we continue to talk about. I want to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or of course you can always call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Happy Canada Day to everybody on Tuesday, and we'll chat again next week.